My name is Dorothy Hale, and for most of my life I believed my world was simple. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ridgeview, Colorado, in a small brick house with ivy climbing up one side and a porch swing that creaked every time the wind passed through. That house smelled like my mother's lavender candles, the ones she used to buy from a little shop in Evanston, Illinois, every time she visited her sister. The scent clung to the curtains, the cushions, and even the wooden floors. To me, it smelled like safety. It smelled like childhood. It smelled like home. And for years, I thought nothing could take that away from me. I was wrong. When my mother passed away, everything became blurry. The first week after the funeral felt like walking underwater. I moved from room to room as if my feet didn't belong to me, listening to the silence that had replaced her soft humming. My father, once warm and gentle, became a shadow of himself. He rarely looked at me, and when he did, it was as if he didn't recognize me. His eyes were cracked mirrors, reflecting someone I no longer understood. He stopped smiling, stopped talking about anything that mattered, and stopped being the man who used to read me stories by the fireplace when storms shook the windows. 6 months later, he changed completely. He announced one crisp autumn morning that he was getting remarried. The words fell like heavy stones in the kitchen, where I stood holding a cup of coffee that suddenly tasted like nothing. I didn't know he had even been dating. I hadn't seen him laugh or smile or leave the house long enough to fall in love with anyone. Yet there he was, ironing a shirt for the wedding and telling me about a woman named Carolyn Mercer, a woman from Brighton, England, with a sharp voice, sharper eyebrows, and an even sharper attitude. When I first met her, she looked me up and down as though I were a piece of old furniture she planned to throw out the moment she moved in. She had this smile, thin and stretched, like it wasn't meant to comfort anyone. My father stood beside her, stiff, nervous, too eager to please her. I remember thinking, this isn't love. This is something else, something darker. Their wedding was small, held in the backyard under strings of lights my father and I had hung years before for my mother's birthdays. I stood in the corner of the yard, wearing a blue dress that my mother had once said made me look like the sky after rain. Caroline barely glanced at me the entire night. When she spoke to me, it was to tell me to move a chair or hand her a napkin, as though I were staff instead of family. By the time the guests left and the music faded, I wanted nothing more than to hide in my room and disappear into sleep. But when I stepped into the living room, Caroline stood there with her arms crossed, blocking the doorway. The air around her felt colder, like she brought her own frost into the room. My father stood next to her, his posture tense, his expression unreadable. "Dorothy," he said, clearing his throat, his voice flat and distant, "we need to talk." A sinking feeling twisted in my stomach. "About what?" "You're an adult now," he said, not quite looking at me. "It's time you start paying your own way." I blinked, confused. "I already help with bills when I can." "That's not enough," he cut in. "You need to find somewhere else to live. Pack your things. Tomorrow morning, you're out." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him correctly. My home, our home, was the only place I had left. "Dad, this is my home. You can't just throw me out." "Mom," his face twisted and he snapped, "do not bring your mother into this." Carolyn stepped forward then, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. "Your father and I need the space, Dorothy. It's time you learn to stand on your own. You're old enough. You don't need to live here anymore." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a discussion. She wanted me gone, and she wanted it immediately. I looked at my father, hoping to see hesitation, a flicker of guilt, anything that showed he cared. But he didn't even meet my eyes. He simply turned away and walked into the kitchen, leaving me standing alone in the living room with a woman who clearly despised me. The silence she left behind felt heavier than any words she could have said. That night was the longest of my life. I packed my suitcases while staring at the familiar corners of my room. The faded blue wallpaper my mother had put up when I was 10, the photos taped above my dresser, the books stacked on my shelf, the quilt she had sewn for me during a cold winter. Every object in that room held a memory, and each one felt like a small goodbye. As I folded my clothes, I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. But deep down I knew the truth. This was not about me. This was about Caroline's control over my father, and my father's growing willingness to let her decide the direction of his life. And mine, by the time the sun rose, my room was empty except for the furniture. I stood in the doorway, holding 2 suitcases and a small envelope with $160 I had managed to save. I looked around one last time, breathing in the ghost of lavender candles that still lingered in the air. For a moment I almost expected my mother to appear behind me, telling me everything was going to be okay, but the hallway remained empty. And so did the space in my chest. I walked outside, the morning air cold against my skin, and placed my suitcases at the edge of the porch. My father didn't come out to see me off. Caroline stood at the window, watching, smirking slightly, as though satisfied with her victory. I didn't cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when everything has already fallen apart. I sat on the top step of the porch, staring at the quiet street of Ridgeview, trying to imagine where I would go next. I had no plan, no home, and no one left to turn to. And then my phone rang. That single call would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and the truth hiding beneath years of lies. The morning my life broke open for the second time began in silence. I sat on the porch steps of the house I had been forced to leave, 2 suitcases at my feet and the cold wood pressing against the back of my legs. The street in front of me was empty, no cars passing, no neighbors waking up early, no children rushing to catch the school bus. Only a thin layer of frost coated the grass like powdered sugar, sparkling weakly under the pale Colorado sun. I didn't know where I was supposed to go. I didn't have family left, at least none I had been close to, and I didn't have enough money to rent even a small room. For a moment, I wondered if this was how people ended up lost one decision from someone else, and suddenly your entire world changed course. Then my phone rang. The sound startled me. It was sharp, cutting through the stillness like a blade. I pulled the phone out of my pocket, expecting maybe a telemarketer or a late text from one of the few friends I still kept in touch with. But instead, the screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, with an Ohio area code. My stomach tightened. I almost let it ring out. But something instinct or fear or fate made me swipe to answer. Hello? My voice came out thin and unsure. Is this Dorothy Halley? Asked a calm, steady voice. A woman, professional, someone who dealt with delicate conversations for a living. Yes, this is Dorothy. This is St. Helena Medical Center in Fairmont, Ohio, she said. We need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible. It's regarding your mother. For a moment, the world around me froze, the frost, the air, my heartbeat, everything. I stared out at the street, but I couldn't see it anymore. My mother? I whispered. You must have the wrong person. My mother passed away 6 months ago. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. And then gently the woman said, No, Dorothy. She's alive. My grip on the phone loosened. I thought I might drop it, or maybe drop myself along with it. My chest tightened in a way that hurt. Alive? How? What do you mean? I'm afraid I can't explain everything over the phone, she replied softly. But she asked us to contact you. She wants you here as soon as you can come. I wanted to scream that none of this made sense. That the funeral, the burial, the grief, all of it had been real, but the words wouldn't come. My mind felt like it had cracked open. I stood up too fast, almost tripping over my own suitcase. Oh, okay, I said. I'll come. I'll come right away. The call ended, but the echo of her words kept ringing in my ears. Your mother is alive. I didn't say goodbye to the house. I didn't look back at the window where Carolyn had been watching me only minutes earlier. Instead, I dragged my luggage down the sidewalk and headed toward the bus station at the edge of Ridgeview. I bought the cheapest ticket I could find, $49 for a painfully long ride east, with 2 transfers, 1 overnight stop, and no guarantee of heat on the coldest parts of the journey. The bus smelled faintly of old coffee and worn fabric. A man in a heavy jacket slept 2 rows ahead of me, his head pressed against the window. A mother comforted her fussy toddler near the back. The world continued around me as though nothing had changed, but everything had. The bus rattled through the night as we crossed into Kansas. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of my mother flickered through my mind, her laughter, her gentle hands brushing my hair, the way she used to tuck me into bed and whisper, "Good night, my star." She had been the anchor of my life, the soft place I always returned to. So how could she be alive? The hours passed in a blur of highway lights and restless thoughts. I tried to make sense of the impossible. I tried to imagine her lying in a hospital bed, alive after all this time, waiting for me. I tried to imagine what kind of mistake could have happened, and why no one had told me. But every explanation I came up with felt thin and fragile. By the time the bus finally rolled into Fairmont, Ohio, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a faint golden glow over the frosted rooftops. I grabbed my bags and stepped into the chilly morning air. My legs were stiff, my eyes tired, and my heart felt like it had lived 100 years in the past 24 hours. I didn't wait for a taxi. I walked the 3 long blocks to St. Helena Medical Center, my breath visible in the cold. The hospital stood tall, its glass doors reflecting the early light. As I stepped inside, the faint smell of disinfectant hit me, mixing with a quiet, constant hum of machines in distant rooms. Nurses moved quickly through the halls, their shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you? My name is Dorothy Halley," I said. "I was told my mother is here." The woman nodded in recognition, as though she had been expecting me. "Room 214. Take the elevators to the 2nd floor." I almost ran, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached room 214, I stopped. My hand hovered over the door handle. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, preparing myself for whatever waited inside. Then I pushed the door open. There she was, my mother. Her hair was thinner, streaked with gray. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes warm, brown, familiar, lifted to meet mine, and suddenly everything inside me shattered. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice breaking like glass. She reached out a trembling hand. "Dorothy, honey, come here." I moved toward her slowly, as though afraid she might disappear if I came too fast. When her fingers touched mine, I felt warmth, real warmth, and tears streamed down my face. "How?" I choked out. "How are you alive? Why didn't anyone tell me?" She squeezed my hand gently, guiding me into the chair beside her bed. "Sit down, sweetheart. I need to tell you the truth. All of it, and it won't be easy." My heartbeat pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else in the room. She took a breath. "Your father sabotaged my car." My entire body went cold.
"He wanted me dead, Dorothy," she continued softly. "He wanted all my property."
"All my savings, everything, but I survived the crash. And when I realized what he had done, I knew I had to disappear for a while. I had to protect myself. And I had to protect you." The room spun slowly, like the earth was tilting. "I kept quiet," she said. "I worked with the police. I waited to see how far he would go. And yesterday, when he threw you out of the house, I knew he was done pretending. That was the final proof I needed." She brushed away one of my tears with her thumb. "He wanted us both gone, Dorothy. Both of us." Her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. But under that blanket, something stronger grew: anger, confusion, shock, and a fierce, overwhelming love for the woman who had survived everything to protect me. I held her hand tighter. And in that moment I realized my life had changed again, this time not from grief, but from truth. The hours after my mother told me the truth felt unreal, as though I were living inside a dream that kept shifting between clarity and distortion. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, listening to the faint beeping of the monitor that tracked her heartbeat. Each soft beep felt like a reminder that she was still alive despite everything my father had done to her. I wanted to cry, scream, break something, shake the walls of the hospital until the truth stopped hurting. But instead, I squeezed her hand and tried to breathe through the storm inside me. My mother leaned back against the pillows, exhausted from speaking. She looked like she had survived a war because she had. "Dorothy," she said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in. I know you're hurting. But I need you to be strong just a little longer." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full of sorrow. She hated that she had to put me through this. She hated that the truth came wrapped in so much pain. But she also knew that hiding any longer would have been worse. The moment he threw me out, her fear had turned into certainty. My father's intentions were real, his cruelty was real. And the time for staying silent had ended. "I've already spoken to the detectives in Columbus," she said. The investigation is moving quickly. They have evidence more than enough. I swallowed hard. Evidence? She nodded slowly. Your father forged my signature on insurance documents, life insurance worth nearly $850,000. He transferred money into secret accounts. He even sent messages to Carolyn about what he planned to do next. They recovered it all. The words hit me like a blow to the stomach. I had trusted my father. I had believed his grief. I had cried beside him. And all along, he had been calculating, planning, preparing to erase us from his life forever. How long? I whispered. How long has he been planning this? My mother hesitated. Longer than you think. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady the pressure building there. What about Carolyn? She was part of it, my mother said quietly. She encouraged him. She wanted my assets, my properties, my savings, even my old family home in Carverton, Virginia. She saw me as an obstacle that needed to disappear. A wave of nausea washed over me. Carolyn had looked at me like I was nothing from the moment we met. Now I understood why. I wasn't a person to her. I was a problem. A loose thread she needed to cut. Before I could ask another question, there was a soft knock at the door. 2 detectives stepped inside, a woman named Detective Monroe and a tall, calm man named Detective Harris. Both wore the kind of serious expressions that told me they had seen more darkness in the world than anyone should. Dorothy? Detective Monroe asked gently. We'd like to ask you a few questions if you're ready. I glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and took a deep breath. I'm ready. The detectives explained everything. How my father had tampered with the brakes of my mother's car. How the crash had been labeled an accident until the evidence proved otherwise. How Carolyn had helped create false documents and make quiet inquiries about my mother's will. How they had monitored my father for months, watching him grow reckless, sloppy, and impatient. Then they asked about the weeks after my mother died. I told them everything, the way my father grew colder, the way he pushed me aside, the sudden remarriage, the day he told me to leave. I described his tone, his distant behavior, the way he avoided every memory of my mother as though she had never existed. Every detail felt like a knife. But the detectives listened carefully, taking notes, nodding, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke louder than words. When the questioning ended, Detective Harris closed his notebook. Thank you, Dorothy. Your statement helps complete the timeline. We're moving on this now. Does that mean? I began. He nodded. We'll be making the arrest today. My breath caught in my throat. It felt strange relief and fear mixing together, twisting inside me. My father would finally face the consequences of what he had done. Hours later, after the detectives left, I sat beside my mother in silence, staring out the hospital window. Snow had begun to fall softly over Fairmont, drifting like tiny feathers in the gray afternoon light. The world outside looked peaceful, almost innocent. It didn't match the turmoil inside me. I wasn't there when the arrests happened, but the detectives later told me what occurred. They arrived at the house in Ridgeview just after sunset. Carolyn answered the door first, wearing a silk robe and an irritated expression. My father stood behind her, holding a whiskey glass in his hand. The moment he saw the officers, he didn't shout. He didn't run. He didn't even ask why they were there. He simply set the glass on the table and said, "Who told her?" As if the only thing he cared about was the fact that his secret had finally cracked open. The neighbors later told me the officers led them both out in handcuffs. Carolyn cried. My father did not. The streetlights flickered above them, casting long shadows as they walked toward the patrol car. People watched from porches and windows. Ridgeview was a quiet town. Arrests like that didn't happen often, especially not for a man everyone believed was a grieving husband. When Detective Monroe returned to the hospital the next morning, she delivered the news calmly. They're in custody, Dorothy. Both of them. Your father will be facing multiple charges, including attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. I nodded, my throat tight. How long? How long could he be in prison? A long time, she said gently. And with the evidence your mother collected, there's little room for doubt. My mother reached for my hand. Her grip was weak, but steady. It's over now, she whispered. You're safe, but safe didn't feel like the right word. Not yet. Maybe someday it would. Maybe someday the weight of everything would finally lift. But for now, all I could do was hold onto her hand and let the reality settle in. My father, the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, taught me to ride a bike in our driveway, sang me lullabies when I had nightmares, had tried to erase me from his life. And he had tried to kill the one person who had loved me more than anyone else ever had. This truth was heavy. But it was also freeing, because for the first time in months, the lies were gone. For the first time, justice was on our side. And for the first time, I knew that the nightmare was ending. The 3 months that followed felt like living inside a storm, loud, chaotic, and impossible to escape. Every week brought another court date, another session of testimony, another stack of evidence showing who my father had become. I sat beside my mother in the courtroom of Columbus Federal Court, listening as lawyers spoke about him as though he were a stranger. And in a way, he was. The man on the stand, the man with the blank stare and the tightly pressed lips, was not the father who once held my hand when I scraped my knee. He wasn't the father who used to pack my school lunches or cheer during my spelling bees. That man was gone. The person sitting across from us was someone who had chosen money, control, and manipulation over his own family. The trial was long and bitter. The prosecution brought in experts who explained how the breaks had been deliberately sabotaged, how the forged signatures matched my father's writing, and how the money had been slowly funneled into secret accounts in London, England. They played conversations between my father and Carolyn, where their words carried the icy sharpness of people who believed they were untouchable. I tried not to listen, but I couldn't help it. Each word carved another wound into my heart. Carolyn cried on the stand. She claimed she had been manipulated, that she loved my father and believed whatever he told her. But the evidence didn't lie. Her emails, her text messages, the bank transfers she had approved, they all painted a clear picture. She was as involved as he was. And in some ways, colder. My father, on the other hand, barely spoke. When he did, his voice was flat, as if he had accepted his fate long before the trial even began. He never looked at me. Not once. He looked at the judge, at his lawyer, at the floor, but not at the daughter he had betrayed. A small part of me wanted him to show some emotion, some regret, some flicker of the man I had once known, but there was nothing. When the jury returned with the verdict, the room felt impossibly still. Guilty on all counts. My mother squeezed my hand. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't emotional, but because my body felt too overwhelmed to react. It was as though my heart had been holding itself together for months and suddenly didn't know how to beat normally anymore. 2 days later, the judge sentenced my father to 24 years in federal prison. Caroline received almost 5 years for her part in the conspiracy and fraud. The finality of the sentences washed over me like a wave, heavy, cold, and strangely cleansing. Justice had arrived, harsh and undeniable. And with it came the beginning of something new. After the trial ended, my mother and I made a decision together. She wanted to leave Ohio. The memories were too heavy, the roads too familiar with pain. I didn't argue. I wanted a fresh start as much as she did. So we packed our things, her old books, my clothes, the few photographs we still had, and bought a small white house in Willowbrook, Virginia, a quiet town surrounded by hills and tall oak trees. The house sat at the end of a narrow road, painted white with navy shutters, and had a long porch with a swing that creaked just slightly when someone sat on it. The first time my mother and I walked up the steps, we both paused. It wasn't Ridgeview, it wasn't the hospital, it wasn't a courtroom. It was something new, something gentle. My mother used the money she recovered, the money my father had tried to steal, to buy the house outright. She insisted I take $12,000 to start a small business, something I had once dreamed about but never believed I would have the chance to pursue. I decided to open a small bakery in town, a place with warm bread, simple pastries, and a quiet corner where people could sit and read. Baking had always been my escape, even during the darkest times. Now it could be my beginning. Those first weeks in Willowbrook felt almost unreal. I woke up each morning to the soft sound of birds and the rustle of leaves outside my window. My mother spent her time gardening in the backyard, planting roses, lavender, and lilac flowers she said reminded her of hope. I would sit beside her sometimes, handing her tools or simply watching her smile softly as she worked. That smile had been gone for so long that seeing it again felt like a gift. Evenings were my favorite. My mother and I would sit on the porch swing together, wrapped in blankets when the air turned chilly. The soft lights from the nearby houses glowed against the darkening sky, and sometimes neighbors walked by, waving kindly. They didn't know our story. They didn't know the pain we carried, and that was comforting. Here, we weren't victims. We weren't survivors of something terrible. We were simply two women starting over. Yet the past didn't disappear completely. Some nights, when the wind howled through the trees, I would remember my father's face in the courtroom, emotionless, hollow. I would ask myself how a person could change so drastically. How someone who once loved us could try to destroy us. But then I would feel my mother leaning against me, her hand gently resting on mine as if sensing my thoughts. "Don't go back there," she would whisper. "We're here now. And we're safe. Safe." It was a word that took time to believe in. But slowly, day by day, it began to feel real. By the time autumn arrived in Willowbrook, our lives had settled into a peaceful rhythm. My bakery, Dorothy's Hearth, opened its doors with a wooden sign my mother painted herself. Customers trickled in, teachers, families, elderly couples who wanted fresh bread in the mornings. For the first time in years, I felt proud. I felt seen. I felt alive. One evening in late October, as my mother and I sat on the porch swing once again, I looked out at the quiet town and felt something shift inside me. A realization. A deep truth. This life, this peace, this simple joy was everything my father tried to take away. But he failed. He didn't understand something important, that survival runs deeper than betrayal. That truth is stronger than manipulation. That love, real love, cannot be erased. I turned to my mother, who smiled at me as the porch light flickered softly. And I thought, this is our life now. One built from strength, from honesty, from courage. This is the life we reclaimed, and this time, no one can break it.